بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. In the name of Allah, we seek His aid, we seek His mercy, we seek refuge in Allah from the evil of ourselves and evil of our bad deeds. Whomsoever Allah guides can never be misguided. Whomsoever Allah allows to be led astray, none can guide. Inshallah, we will continue or start with the chapter entitled Al-Ghashiyah. And Al-Ghashiyah is the chapter that comes before the chapter we took last week. Who remembers the chapter that we took last week? So it's Al-Fajr, right? We talked about the chapter of Al-Fajr. Can we just get 3 benefits from the chapter of Al-Fajr? Firstly, what does Al-Fajr mean? Dawn. And linguistically comes from what? To bring something open. How does the word fajr in Arabic, which means someone that's disobedient, whether we compare it to English or Arabic, and that's the beauty of understanding the language, someone that's disobedient and the breaking out from something to something else, where is the similarity between the two? Someone that's disobedience and breaking out from one thing to something else, or, that thing. Where's the similarities? Or what's the similarity which will allow one to understand why the same root was used? In Arabic we have what? There's fajr, right? And then there's Fajr, and then there's Fujar. This is dawn, which is F-A-J-R. This is what? The disobedient person. And this is Fajr. And this is plural, disobedient people. And this is Fujar. So we see the root in all of these is what? Fa, ja, and then what? Ra. So this is the root. When you study Arabic, this is the root of the radical of the verb, fajara, right? So it comes in transforms in different ways. One is fajr, and then one is fajr, and one is fujar. Fajr is the noun. Fajr is the object, or the subject, the person doing the action. It's also a noun. And this is the plural. So these are the doers, and this is a time frame. Where's the similarity between this and these?
In that you break out from the night into the day, and the Fajr is the one that breaks out from the right path into the wrong.
Exactly. Dispensing out or breaking away from obedience to disobedience. We can say, for lack of better words, what? To spiritually rebel. I was going to say, we can even say, to spiritually repel what? Repel what?
The truth.
To repel good with evil. Repel the truth with desires. Right? You say falsehood. So that's the similarity when we talk about Fajr. We covered that. Right? What's another benefit we took from the chapter? I'll mention some verse. فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ إِذَا مَا ابْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَمَهُ. And as far as mankind, when Allah tests him, right, and gives him virtuous akramahu wa na'amahu, gives him blessings and gives virtues and blessings, he says, my Lord has what? Been gracious to me. Right? What was the attitude or the belief, perception of the Arabs during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, which is still a perception nowadays of people? What was it? We spoke about it. To where if someone is given a lot of things, a lot of tangible things, let's say, oh, my Lord is good to me. God's been good. I got my car, got my house, got my white picket fence, I got my green grass, I even got my dog. And I just got a raise, man. Yeah, alhamdulillah.
And is that same person grateful in the opposite if something bad happens?
Okay, but what was the perception of the Arabs during that time?
The person themselves gets swole up, like he gets
Swole up, okay.
Yeah, he gets like a big head, and everyone else around him thinks that's the blessed person. Like that's the person who's better than everybody else.
So they tied blessings to what?
Material.
Material things. The more that he had, or she had, that was definitely a sign of Allah's what?
Blessing.
Just think this is red, not black. Learn the black.
We got red.
We got red there too. I don't want to get too colorful. It's going to take time. Right? That what? That it was a sign of Allah's blessing. Because during the time of the Arabs, what was the things that the Arabs loved besides red camels? Right? If you had a lot of kids and a lot of assets. We would say money, but assets. Because money wasn't, there's no dollar bill. Dollar bill doesn't have any value. There's things that had intrinsic and extrinsic value, such as the camel. You can make a fur coat, you can make a camel coat out of it, milk, you know,
Taxi.
right? Taxi, train, right? So, if you had a lot of that, that was a sign that you were blessed. And this is one of the things that could, like you say, deceive someone during the time of the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him. Because if you notice the prophets, were they rich or were they poor? Most of them. Poor. Okay? So the people would say, he's poor. Why would you follow someone like, he's talking, but he's poor. He has nothing. Why? Right? They automatically looked at what was tangible. He has a flip phone. He doesn't have an iPhone. Lesh. Why would you? You see? And that was one of the things that they would say. Even though the prophet was respected, sallallahu alaihi wasallam was respected before he was a prophet, but still at that time, when he left everything, and he was poor, he doesn't have. And then on top of that, the ones that had it all were the ones that were calling against the prophet, calling against this poor person. Right? If you look at it nowadays, the ones that are blessed with tangible things, money, so on and so forth, sometimes they'll challenge what? Religion in and of itself. Right? And they'll go to the degree of challenging the essence of the religion, the basic principles of religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever. And people will look at them simply for the fact that what?
They got money.
They got money or power, right? Money and power.
Yeah.
And that money and power could be two words that are synonymous with movie star, right? Politician. Okay? When they say something, how are you going to deny this is a movie star? But that's, the fact they're a movie star is totally irrelevant to them talking about something that they have no knowledge of. But due to the media coming from the word medium to get a message across, it gives you a certain perception that what they say must hold weight, but in reality, it holds no weight whatsoever. And it all stems back to that belief that we're talking about. Someone having a lot of tangible things will, over time, cause you to think that they have a blessing from God, or that God loves them, or that what they're going to say is definitely of some value. So that was one of the benefits we took from the chapter of Fajr, which is very important. When Allah mentions those two verses, for the one that Allah has, and that's why He said, فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ إِذَا مَا ابْتَلَاهُ. And as far as mankind, when Allah tests him by giving him this and giving him that, He says, my Lord has been good to me. وَأَمَّا إِذَا قَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقُهُ وَابْتَلَاهُ. Right? وَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقُهُ. And the one that Allah tests and withholds His provisions from him, He says, my Lord has what? Despised me or belittled me. Right? Ahanani min ihana, like to belittle or demise. Right? So the one that doesn't have that, people will think, oh, he must have done something wrong in his life. Oh, his father must have done something wrong. He doesn't have a lot of tariqah. He doesn't have a lot of what? Of inheritance, etc. That's very important principle that we take from the chapter of Al-Fajr. A very important principle. Do not rely only on the tangible things when it comes to belief in the intangible, who is the creator of tangibilities, being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Then he gave an example of the people of Thamud, and we notice from the Quran, when Allah mentions a principle, he'll mention a belief, and then he'll give you an example, which is the example of the actions of the people that have that belief. Okay? And when pondering over the Quran, you see Allah does this many times. Alright? So today, inshallah, we're going to cover a portion of the chapter of Al-Ghashiyah. And the chapter of Al-Ghashiyah is Arabic, which means that which covers something. Al-Ghisha is to cover something. Now that could be literal or metaphorical. Okay? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Al-Ghashiyah, that which has been translated as an overwhelming event. But it's actually, the translation of it is something that covers something. But when we look at the context of the verse, it's talking about an overwhelming event. Something that is covering you to the degree that you have no control over it. And this is talking about the day of judgment. Okay? So the day of judgment has names in the Quran. And Al-Ghashiyah is one of them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says after Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Hal ataka hadithul ghashiyah. Has the news of the overwhelming or description of the overwhelming event come to you? Now we see here, it's a question, and he's asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which in return is asking all of us. It's news to all of you. So this is when we talk about the Quran. Quran means that which is recited. And that comes from the verb qara'a yaqra'u, Qur'anan, right? And Quran, that literally means to read, but it can also mean to recite, that which is recited to you. And it also comes from qur, and qur means that which is joined together. And that's why when Allah mentions in the Quran, when he talks about akramakumullah, he talks about the time of the year, the time of the month for the female, he says thalathatu quru. He says whenever the woman gets divorced and there is a time frame that she should wait for 3 cycles. And the word used there is qur. Quru, which is plural, which means the joining of the akramakumullah, the joining of the blood, which is a sign of purification at that time. So some say that Quran comes from the joining of the chapters, the joining of the surah. So we see here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions here in the Quran, has the story of the overwhelming day come to you. Now this is a question that is showing importance. It's called tashweek. He's drawing your attention. And the question is not insinuating, obviously, that he doesn't know. Right? Did you hear about what happened yesterday? Right? It's something that I know that happened, and obviously many of you are going to know. What happened yesterday? Flood, rain, right? Right? So that's similar, right? Has the news come to you? Right? And also it's basically saying also, you know about what happened. Okay? And Allah does that many times in the Quran. Hal ataka hadithu Musa idh nadahu rabb. Has the news of Moses come to you when his Lord called him in the valley of Tuwa, right? When he called him in that valley and revealed to him himself. So we see here Allah is mentioning that day of Ghashiyah, and the day of Ghashiyah is an overwhelming day. And we mentioned even in the last chapter that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives many different descriptions of the day of judgment, and we split it up into 2. Remember that day of judgment is it's the last day. When we talk about the last day, where all of the creation will come in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah the Exalted, where time will stop and many events will take place. And Allah mentions these events. And the day of judgment should immediately do what to the soul or the human being? What should it immediately do? Why is it a pillar of our belief to believe in it?
Accountability.
We said one is accountability, right? And accountability breeds what?
Urgency. Or action.
Action. Sorry?
Submission.
It breeds action, and that action hopefully will not be action of rebellion. It'll be an action of the opposite. It'll be an action of submission to Allah. Because rebellion can be submission to your desires, right? So it's submission, but we say that action of submission is not going to be easy. It's going to be a challenge. But that breeds responsibility. So accountability breeds responsibility. Responsible for what? Responsible for your soul and for the ones that you have to look after, being your family immediately and all of mankind to the best of your ability by calling to good moral and ethical practices of a human being. Okay? So we see that the Day of Judgment, it breeds responsibility for the human being, for them to be moral in practice. Okay? So that is one of the benefits of believing in the Day of Judgment. It brings a sense of urgency. And Islam does not allow or does not disclose, being Allah does not disclose when the day is. O mankind, on the day of 2027. No, you don't find any of that in the Quran. Right? When Allah says they'll ask you about it, tell them that this situation is with Him. So we don't know, which brings a sense of urgency. It can be at any time. Okay. Question: if someone was to die now, anywhere in the world, do we say that that is the Day of Judgment?
For them?
No, it's waiting.
No, it's not the Day of Judgment. They die and they will be in their grave. And that is the waiting period, which is called the Barzakh. Waiting for what? The Day of Judgment. So there will be some people that will be alive still, and there will be some people that will be dead in their graves. But on the Day of Judgment, there will be many things that happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions يَوْمَ تَضَعُ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ يَوْمَ تَضَعُ كُلُّ حَمْلٍ حَمْلَهَا. SubhanAllah. He gives an example. He says that any woman that is carrying their baby will basically deliver. كُلُّ حَمْلٍ حَمْلَهَا وَتَرَى النَّاسَ سُكَارَى. And you'll see people as though they're drunk, like in a state of drunkenness. وَمَا هُمْ بِسُكَارَى. But they are not drunk. وَلَكِنَّ عَذَابَ اللَّهِ شَدِيدٌ. But the punishment of Allah is so harsh. So Allah that's just one description of it. Another one is إِذَا زُلْزَلَتِ الْأَرْضُ زِلْزَالَهَا. When there's an earthquake, right? فَدَمْدَمَ عَلَيْهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ. So we see that that the zilzal, an earthquake, is a sign also of the Day of Judgment. So it'll be a sign. There are many signs that will take place. The Prophet mentioning the sweat of the believers, and the sweat of people will be at different levels. Some will be at their necks, some will be lower than that. So understanding that there will be many events that are going to take place. So Allah is saying that this day is the day of Ghashiyah. وَفُتِحَتِ السَّمَاءُ أَبْوَابًا. Right, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the skies, the sky will be open, the doors of the skies will be open. Many things that will take place on the Day of Judgment. So Allah describes this day as the day of Ghashiyah. The day of Ghashiyah. And then He gives a description. وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ خَاشِيَةٌ. Many faces that will be humbled. When Allah says wajh means face. But He's not talking literally about the face. The word in Arabic, wajh, can mean what is called the that. It is the actual essence, or the whole object, or the person of that property. Okay? Okay? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says wujuh, it's talking about the people. The people will be humbled. Right? They will be humbled in that situation because they have no control. We as human beings, when we meet somebody that we feel is very powerful or has more leverage over us, right? Is it more of a reason for us to be humble or arrogant? Humble. Right? Yesterday, if you were at home, ask yourself this question. Because sometimes we have the power of Allah in our conscious mind or in our subconscious mind, meaning that we know but we don't really think about it every now and then, which is most of us. And in our unconscious mind, like we don't even think about it at all. Wallahi, when you saw in the news, people, when you didn't know that there was a storm, but you saw in the news that it reached to that degree, like in Northwest Houston, Cypress Wood, in North Houston, you see people on the bridges, flashbacks of Katrina, people talking about the buses haven't come yet. But 10 minutes earlier, the mayor said the buses are already going, they're dispersing, but there are people saying, it's been 3-4 hours, buses haven't come yet. What happened to your belongings? All of them were gone. There was this lady, she had diabetes and she was in a wheelchair. She had oxygen, breathing oxygen, and she had all of her belongings were gone. All she had was a bag, right? She didn't know where she was going to live. And all this is because when they flip the next scene, it shows a GMC driving up, the water's up to the wheels, past the wheel, at the top of the wheel. What were you thinking is the question. Were you thinking of the time of Noah, alayhi salam? Were you thinking of, subhanAllah, I heard the rain, but I didn't know that it reached to this level. Can you imagine if you were driving on the highway and everything was fine, and then you drive and then it's raining, next thing you know, there's a pile of water. How many of you heard of the woman that was talking to her husband on the phone? She couldn't get out of her car because you realize if water comes up to a certain degree in your car, you can't open your door because of the pressure. So you're literally looking at water rise and you don't know. I mean, if water comes in and breaks the window, you're not going to just Superman and go against the current of the water and the broken glass. It's going to come everywhere. So water can be your best friend, and water is actually an element of sustenance, but at the same time, it can be the element that causes your demise. You see how Allah uses certain things, we don't even realize it. And it's in a matter of a split second. A split second. You see? So when Allah gives an example, when you see something like that, you think of how Allah can easily cause events to happen. When you see that on the news, someone should say, subhanAllah, glory to Allah that this happens so quick. And we take verses, when Allah says something is going to happen in the future, or we take when He says, my obedience to me is this, and people that were disobedient, this is what happened to them. After they've been given the opportunity, this is what happens to them. We read it like it's the tall tale. Remember those books that have the golden spine on them, the little tall tale Disney books? Right? We read it like that. We don't take it seriously. When we see a storm, something tangible, we take it seriously. That's when we take it seriously. But Allah's giving you opportunities to be responsible. You read these verses, you take it seriously, even though you know it's going to happen in the future. You don't know when, though. Are you going to have this sense of urgency, accountability, responsibility? Or do I have to actually bring you a sign of my capability? Such as yesterday. Right? This is how one should look at what people can term as natural disasters. So Allah mentions the Day of Judgment, and He mentions the situation of the people. وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ خَاشِعَةٌ. So the first description is that they will be humbled. عَامِلَةٌ نَاصِبَةٌ. They will be humbled. Amila is laboring, working hard, trying their level best. Nausiba is exhausted. So they're working and working and working, and they're exhausted from the work that they do. But what happens to those people? Tasla narun hamiyah. And tasla is, they will enter the scorching fire. Some scholars mention that this tasla narun hamiyah, that this laboring of the soul and of the body of the people, that they were laboring and doing hard work in that which was baltil, in that which was not beneficial, in that which was impermissible. So if we were to say there was a group, for instance, the first one comes to my mind is the KKK, right? Everyone know what KKK is, right?
Yeah.
Who doesn't know what the KK?
Who doesn't?
Yes. Who does? Let's try that. Ku Klux Klan. Everyone know okay, good. Before I move on. Ku Klux Klan was a group of racist Caucasians, okay?
It is a group of racist Caucasians.
It is. Well, use the present tense. It was. There's still Ku Klux Klan in some of the hearts of the people. Well, not the best. Right? The person that said, you know what, I started a branch of the KKK in my city. I raised money for it. I went around to the churches. I went around to the different areas to raise money for this organization. And I put in 40 hours for 40, let's say 20 years to raise money to start this branch in my city. Did they work hard? Did they exhaust themselves in that? But it was in what? Something that was beneficial to society? To their soul, even? How is it not beneficial to society?
Injustice
Injustice. To who?
to the other people.
To the other people. How is it not beneficial to their soul?
Dirty work.
Dirty work. Sorry?
It's just making them harbor hate.
Right. It brings hate towards other people. Right? So they are hardworking, but it was in that which was not beneficial. Okay? Did they violate anyone's rights? Right? It can lead to violation of rights of human being, particularly African Americans. Okay? So if we take it on a higher scale, the right of who has the most right? If that right is violated voluntarily with knowledge, that's where the work of that person, if it's in other than or in other for the Creator, that's where it can be detrimental. But again, it's not for me to say this person here, yeah, what they're doing is not going to benefit them at all. Right? Because we don't know what is in their hearts, and we don't know how Allah will take them off of this earth. How Allah will take them off of this earth. But Allah gives the example, and He constantly in the Quran, which is the main message of the Quran, is the oneness of God. Knowing the oneness of God, what it is, what that entails, okay, and how to act that out. Everything we talk about revolves around that. Every single thing. And that's why when people want to ask you about Islam, or you tell people about Islam, do not talk about the secondary issues. Don't dwell on them. It's fine to talk about it from a contemporary standpoint, but use that as a means to get back to the primary purpose of the religion itself. That is so important. Because people can put you in a corner and talk about a contemporary issue that, based on the what's going on, that you may feel that it may be unjust. Because the more they act towards, such as women's rights, right? They may ask you about issues of why in inheritance it's this way. And then you delve into the issue and you realize you really haven't studied inheritance, and they may bring to you an issue that you're not familiar with in inheritance. And you're like, well, apparently that looks, yeah, that's your religion. Well, give me some time to think about that. But if you say initially, well, that's what we find in the Quran. Let's talk, what about the Quran itself? Do you know the history of the Quran? Who wrote the Quran? Well, I don't know who wrote the Quran, but I want to talk about this issue. Well, no, let's talk about where it came from and understand that. Right? Who the writer of the Quran was. Right? Just as if someone was to come, if you were to come and ask directions from someone, you were in the north side and you're usually from the southwest side, and you ask directions to someone, and they're like, man, I don't know. I don't know where it is, but you know what? Go down that way. You're going to be like, have a nice day. Thank you. You're looking at the person that's talking. You're not just taking that information, right? So always look at the one who's telling you or talking, and that's how you base whether it's true or it's not, or it's valid or it's invalid. Many times you will hear, especially women, and it's very important. You know, my wife told me, she said one time, we were talking about the rights of the man and the rights of the woman, just jokingly in front of our children. But she got me on this one. She said, well, look, man comes, she said, woman is half of society, and men come from women. So women, in actuality, is all of society. Without us, you're nothing. Let's change the subject. Right? Right? So a lot of times you'll find women, especially when they talk about Islam, the first thing they want to capitalize is on oppression, 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 oppression. And it's not a problem. I want to hear what you have to say. It's not a problem when you say your opinion. It's not. We shouldn't get riled up when someone says something bad about Islam. I mean, they have the right to their opinion. The question is it just an opinion, Or is it a statement based on education? If it's just an opinion, who cares? If she's on candid camera and she says her opinion, but then she tries to base it off Quran, that's where it's like, okay, you need to slow down. Okay? You need to bring your facts. Make sure that it's a discourse based on an academic structure, based on knowledge. That's why in religion, no one can just come up and just say anything. Because you're talking about how they're going to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that they will enter into the scorching fire, Tosla out on Hamiyah, that's another description of the people. Tusqa min aynin aniyah. Then he says, they will be made to drink from a water of boiling spring. Now realize, Allah is mentioning that these people will be humbled because they're covered with this day. The whole earth is the day of judgment. That these people will be humbled because of the situation. They have no power over anything. But now we have no ultimate power now. I hope y'all know that. We have no ultimate power even over our own selves, if you think about it. Because if you drink a lot of water, you'll realize how you have no ultimate power over yourself. Okay? Emotionally, sometimes you have no ultimate power over yourself. Right? That's why it's called jihad an-nafs. What does jihad an-nafs mean in English?
Struggle with the soul.
Struggle with the soul. You're your worst enemy. That's why it's a constant battle. It's not easy. It's not easy. And that's why Islam puts certain parameters for you, because the one that created that soul that you're fighting, he knows. That's why he creates certain parameters. That's why there's certain things that are halal and haram, that are allowed in Islam or not allowed in Islam. And it's only for your benefit. It's only for your spiritual rejuvenation, renewal, reform. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that they will be made to drink from a boiling water. Notice how he mentioned that they will be humbled, laboring, exhausted, but it will bring into the scorching fire. Right? What puts fire out? Water. But then he says, tusqa, that they will be drinking. You think, okay, drinking from boiling water. Tusqa min aynin aniyah. And aniyah is like hot. Yatufuna baynaha wa bayna hamimin. And when Allah mentions in another verse that they will be circumambulating around bayna hamimin, and that the hamim, that fire, it will be very hot. So here he's talking about the spring that they will be drinking from is hot. The reason Allah is mentioning, what is he doing? When somebody reads this, what are you supposed to do? Oh, who is that kind of person again?
Don't want to be that.
Oh. You don't want to obtain those characteristics on a continuous basis. Right? Tusqa min aynin aniyah. Then after he mentions the drink that they'll be drinking from, then after that it says laysa lahum ta'amun. Oh, illa min dhari'. He says that they will have no food except that it's from, the translated here is a thorny plant. And really, dhari' is like a poisonous, dried, thorny plant. Poisonous. So they're going to drink from hot water, and he says there will be no food for them except dhari'. And some of the scholars say that this thorny plant is actually from a tree that is it's called shajarat az-zaqum. Zaqum is it's a tree in the hellfire that has been mentioned in a chapter of the Quran. So he says that he will not be drinking except that it's from this plant. La yusminu wa la yughni min ju'. Then after that, subhanallah. When reading this, again, you always have to check yourself. You always have to check yourself. You say, okay, I know I can't fully picture this, like what's really, really going to happen. But again, you always have to go back, who's saying this? And it brings you a sense of tranquility and security. Tranquility because you're aware that it's true, and sometimes you may be fighting yourself, but the more that you're aware of its truthfulness, it makes you tranquil in knowing that this is going to happen. But at the same time, it brings a sense of urgency to your soul, right? So when you read it, you say, "Oh, you have knowledge of what's going to take place. But constantly checking yourself and saying that, wow, this is Allah telling me that this is going to take place. Who is He? What are His qualities? When constantly, you always have to do that, especially when He talks about issues of the future and the unseen. Especially when He talks about things that you can't fathom and imagine. Right? So mentioning that they will not have any, that their drink will be from a boiling spring and that there will be no food except from a thorny plant. Then He mentions, after you drink and eat this stuff, or not us, inshallah, may Allah not make us of it.
I mean,
I didn't want to say you. He says, La yusminu, that there will be no food for them, or excuse me, they will neither nourish nor satisfy their hunger. So what does that mean that they'll be doing? If it doesn't nourish or satisfy their hunger, and they're drinking and eating from it, if you eat and you're not, and it doesn't satisfy your hunger, what do you do?
Keep eating.
You keep eating. So they're going to keep eating this, feeling the pain, and they're not going to be what? Fulfilled, right? Nor nourished. So they're going to keep. And that's when we see different examples in the hellfire when the Prophet describes certain people, that they will be doing that action that they did in the dunya, in this life, continuously, over and over and over again. Over and over again. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that they are not, la yusminu, they will not be nourished. And yusminu actually comes from samin or samin, which means fat. Right? So they will not be nourished, okay? And it does not relinquish them from hunger. Then Allah mentions, وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاعِمَةٌ, many faces that day will be full of glamour. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah the Exalted, He's mentioning, you see in the Quran, He'll mention the people that have the bad characteristics and the bad outcomes. Then He automatically switches over to the people that have good characteristics and good outcomes. Right? So now He's talking about وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاعِمَةٌ, many faces of that day will be full of glamour. How many times do we see like a movie, you'll see a movie and it'll show like the people in a certain village or in a certain school or something like that, and there'll be some people that are happy, and then it'll move over to the people that are sad. So Allah's painting a picture for you, for lack of better words, for you to understand that people will be in different situations. There will be people that are sad or in a bad situation, and then there will be people that are in a good status. So there will be people that will be faces full of glamour, well pleased with their endeavors. لِسَعْيِهَا رَاضِيَةٌ. Right? Well pleased with their endeavors. Where are they? فِي جَنَّةٍ عَالِيَةٍ. Allah make us from them. And then He says, in a lofty garden. In a lofty garden. Jannah is heaven. But Jannah comes from the word Jannah, the verb Jannah. The word jinn comes from that also. And jinn is what? Scary.
Invisible.
Gremlins? Goose and ghouls. Invisible, right? Forms of creation that were created from fire, right? And they're invisible. There are good jinn, there are bad jinn. Right? Jinn. So, lack of better words, we don't say spirits, but right? They're forms of creation that we cannot see. But the similarity between Jannah and jinn is what? What's the similarity?
Can't see.
Can't see it. What do they call the baby in the womb of the mother? Janine. Can we see it? I mean, without ultrasound. I know people think ultrasound. We cannot see, especially the anesthesiologist, that's why he's laughing. We cannot see it. So, again, the beauty of the Arabic language, when you have that root, it allows you to at least get an idea of understanding the similarities between the objects. Okay? So Allah says, Fi jannatin aliyah. And Jannah here is lofty garden. It's lofty. Then Allah describes Jannah. So in the first part, He wants you to, man, may Allah protect us from, may Allah protect me from this, man, that's deep, right? Okay, they're not full, man. Makes you scared. Then he wants you to entice you. He says, Fi Jannah. He says, in their faces, there will be faces that will be full of glamour, well pleased with their endeavor, in a lofty garden, in which they will not hear any absurd talk. La tasma'u fiha laghiya. You're not going to hear any absurd talk. Talk of absurdity. Now, how many times do we hear that on a daily basis? How many times are we good with it? Is the real question. Right? Do we at least say, oh my God, come on. Do you really have to talk like that? Right? I mean, can we talk about something else? You know, because it's absurd talk. And absurd talk is level talk that has no benefit, waste time. That's absurd talk. What is mentioned by love. Right? And even this radical, the verb is also conjugated to be algha yulghi, and that means what? From the Arabs, to do what? To cancel. To cancel something out. So absurd talk and canceling something out, something that is of no what? Benefit. Of no benefit whatsoever. So in Jannah, the speech there is going to be speech that is not absurd. It's going to be beneficial speech. It's going to be the talk that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, and it's going to be talks full of dhikr. Right? Full of dhikr. And dhikr is remembrance. You're saying glory to Allah. You know, you're mentioning Allah and you're thanking Him because you're pleased with Him and He's pleased with you. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in there is a flowing spring. A flowing spring and goblets well placed. So here, a flowing spring. Okay? Before, what kind of spring was mentioned?
Boiling water.
Huh?
Boiling water.
Boiling water. And this one is a flowing spring. Rivers of honey, lakes of milk is also mentioned in other places in Jannah. Right? So all of this, again, all of this is things of the unseen, but it's there to entice you. Even though you don't know how it will really, really look, but you know that it's going to be something different from this creation. But it's going to be something that you love naturally. That's why it's mentioned. Because the Prophet said that in Jannah there is something that no aynun ra'at wa la udhunun sami'at, that no eye has seen and no ear has heard. And then he says, وَمَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ. And it is not even, the heart of the slave cannot even fathom the reality of heaven. Just the fact of that fact, what does that do to you? See, this is what you actually have to constantly ask yourself as someone that's concerned about their spiritual well-being. You have to constantly ask yourself, what does that really do for me? What does that do to me? You constantly have to check yourself. Because again, it's a constant battle with your soul, your desires. Because your desires naturally is going to question, which is nothing wrong with that. But if that questioning, what's the root cause of the question? Right? Why did you become a Muslim? Right? There's signs of what the root cause of that question was. Rather than, really, why did you become a Muslim? Different. If someone was asking you that, you know, somebody said, what does Shabir mean, man? What is that?
Tell me.
Yeah, you automatically, you're like, because your name's Shabir, you're like, you know, the way that I asked the question, you know, I said, really, Shabir, that's interesting. What does Shabir mean? The root cause is what's most important, right? And those of you that are married know sometimes, you know, especially the man, the way that it comes out, right? I gotta test it. The way that it comes out, we don't mean it, but the way that it comes out can really change things, make us or break us. So, yeah. So it's very important on how we approach issues when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about it, and constantly checking ourselves and asking ourselves. So then Allah continues. He just describes Jannah. He mentioned the three situations of the individuals, Then he mentions heaven, and he mentions a flowing spring in contrast to the hot, boiling water. And then there are elevated couches. فيها سرر مرفوعة وأكواب موضوعة. Elevated couches and goblets well placed, and cushions arrayed, and carpets spread around. All of this is like the lavish, baller life, right? So again, he's saying, and carpets spread around, so they do not look at camels, how they are created. Oh, excuse me. So after this, he's describing heaven. He's describing all these characteristics of heaven. You see that? Okay. We'll conclude in the next 5 minutes, inshallah.
We got until 9:20.
What time is it?
9:03.
Should be another 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So here, after Allah is mentioning all these characteristics of Jannah, and you'll see in the Quran, he gives different characteristics of Jannah, mentioning different things that will happen, just like in the Day of Judgment. Because now you're going to find it all in one chapter. You'll find it in different chapters, different events, different things that take place. Okay? It doesn't contradict, one doesn't contradict the other. One will just be one event at one time as opposed to another event at another time. The whole concept of time itself is different. Okay? See, this is where you as a Muslim, or you, when approaching the Quran, when God says something, we always have to look at, okay, he's talking about the root of the matter, right? Time in and of itself is going to be different, right? When he talks about Noah, how old was Noah? Is Mitchell?
Over 950.
Right, over 950 years. So that whole, just you have to take it a step back. We can't base the lifespan of a human being on our reality. It's on a total different reality. Okay? And sometimes when we see things from history that have been discovered, we say, well, that is not like how we are now. Hence you have some people even talk about the issue of evolution. Right? The way that it was now is the way that it was then is not how it is now. But which is another subject matter. We come from animals and animals. So again, how you approach the Quran, how you approach when Allah says something is very, very important, and that will assist you in understanding correctly, which will assist in the correct action. So when Allah mentions Jannah, He's mentioning these things to entice you, and mentioning things that you will love and that you want to indulge in. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He asks a beautiful question. And it's something for you to recollect over. You notice how Jannah is something that you haven't seen, but He gives you descriptions to entice you. Hellfire is something that you haven't seen. You're eating from a thorny, poisonous plant, and you're drinking from. You will be given a boiling spring. Okay, and on top of all of that, you will not be full nor nourished. All that He's mentioning. But then now He mentions things that are tangible to you. After all that I've mentioned, you may not believe it. After all that I've mentioned, I know it's difficult for you because it's talking about heaven and hell. Right? He stops and He says, okay, as I mentioned to y'all before, look at the one who's speaking. When you always look at the Quran and say, okay, who's telling me this? Okay, then it has to be true. Right after that, He says, أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Right after that, He asks, have you not looked at the camel, how it was created? If you look at the camel in and of itself, how it's created. What animal looks like the camel? Maybe a giraffe. Right? And when we study the camel in and of itself, there's so many, subhanAllah, and the wisdom of Allah's creation in the camel. The camel can go on for how long without eating, drinking?
40 days.
40 days. 40 really.
40.
40. Right? You'll see within its eyelashes, it's able to dispel and you could say filter out sand because it's constantly in the desert, traveling in the desert. right? Its feet, it's like a coolant system. When it's on the hot sand, it doesn't get hot to where it cannot maintain walking on the sand. Even its joints, subhanAllah. The milk of the camel. Have any of y'all drank camel's milk before? Right. I'm going to ask a question, you don't have to answer it, but after you drink the camel's milk, I know you drink it, you make sure you have no plans for the rest of the day.
This is what I heard.
Yes, it's very true. It's very warm, mashallah, and sweet, but make sure you have no plans for the rest of the day. Yeah. Okay?
Cures bone marrow.
Huh?
Cures bone marrow.
Camel's milk, mashallah. So the camel in it is, and then when you look at the camel, it's a very, I don't want to use the word awkward as a negative connotation, okay? But you know what I mean. Has 2 humps, maybe 1, okay? Another beautiful thing about the camel, and when I was in Saudi Arabia, I heard this from, whenever they talk about the camel, because I met a number of Saudis that they still lived in the farm, or they had someone watch over their camel that was well experienced. The camel, if you harm the baby camel of any mother, right? You harm a baby camel and the mother is present and sees that, who knows what happens?
Then the dead meat.
You're dead meat. But it's not immediately. If the mother sees that you harm the camel, you whip their young camel or anything, they will wait for like a year or 2. Wallahi, I swear by Allah. I'm not exaggerating. They will wait. No, seriously. They will wait until the first thing that comes to mind is catch you slipping. They'll wait and they'll catch you and then they'll sit on you.
Wow.
Vendetta, and it's like, none of y'all have heard that before?
No.
Elephants like that.
Allah. Elephants?
Yeah, they remember.
Yeah, it's the 2 animals that are very vengeful. Camels and elephants.
The vengeful, wow. They'll wait and then they'll come and they'll sit on you. And you know camels are very heavy, by the way, in case y'all didn't know that. Very heavy. Yeah. You don't want to run into a camel with your car. I'm telling you, that's the last thing you want to do. So Allah has created the camel in such a way, subhanAllah. If you ever get a chance, just type up characteristics of the camel or how the camel was created, something. You will find that there's so many virtues in the camel itself. Allah uses this in a verse. Have you not looked at the camel, how it was created? SubhanAllah. After all he mentions about the unseen, it could possibly cause someone something, he says, okay, look at the camel. Ishfi. Like what, just looking at it itself, you take it for granted, but you need to take a step back and look at the camel and say, man, this is a weird animal. Like, really? I mean, it can't eat for 40 days. Its milk, it's humps. These humps, what are they for? The fact that the vendetta issue, I mean, subhanAllah, it's an amazing animal. But when you stop to think about any animal, they all have their special characteristics. But at the same time, they all have universal characteristics too. There's a male and there's a female. They reproduce, right? Some of them, like with lions, you know what I mean? The whole male and female characteristics, the characteristics in the male, the characteristics in the female. The bravery naturally in some, and emotion naturally in some, right? You see how Allah it puts it in creation. You have to ask yourself, how are all these parallels? They're all parallel, but at the same time, they're different. Amazing. And then after that, he leaves from the camel. Because when you look at the camel, you look at all other forms of creation like the camel. I mean, animals. Hot, warm-blooded, cold-blooded, reptiles, mammals. All of these things, subhanAllah, amazing. Varieties, colors. I mean, you just look at creation of itself. Then Allah moves on to another form of creation. وَإِلَى السَّمَاءِ كَيْفَ رُفِعَتْ. And he says, and the sky, how it was raised high. Look at the sky. When you look at the sky in of itself, clouds, where did they come from? How are they formed? They're still there. The sun, the moon, the solar system, stars, how all of this happens. When we look at it's very important when we look at creation, we say the sun, but stop and ponder over the sun. Ponder over the sun, what emanates from it. Light. Okay, what does the light do to other forms of creation? You're thinking of the sun, okay, how far away it is, the light that emanates from it, and it emits heat, and also vitamins from that. Vitamin, what? Vitamin D. How many of you are familiar with rickets? Something called rickets. What is rickets? Deficiency in the bone, right? It really shows at the ends of the bone, right? You'll see protrusions to where the portion here it's more concave. That means it's a lack in vitamin D. So you're advised by the doctor. You'll find it in kids. If they're born, you'll see your son has rickets to where bones can be very brittle. You see, look at his wrist.
Just in case.
That's preponderance of the Quran. They'll tell you to sit in the sun so you can get vitamin D, right? And that comes just sitting in the sunlight, right? So when we look at ecosystems, the whole process, the changing of seasons, this is without mankind's intervention. You just stop and ponder over the fact that the changing of seasons, oh, it's going to be cold, yeah, around this month. How did you know? Because that's what usually happens. Man, I don't want it to be cold in December. You know what? Let's form a union to where it's not cold in December and do something about it. We'll talk to Al Gore or something, change it. Stop the ozone layer damage. You can't change it. It's going to happen. Sunnatullah fil kawn. This is what Allah allows to happen, wants to happen. You can't change it. So just pondering over that. We already talked about the animal. Now we're talking about the sky, we're talking about the weather, we're talking about ecosystems, which all forms of creation work with one another and live with one another. Yes?
If you think about it, like without the sun, plants need the sun in order to survive, in order to even grow. And without plants, you don't have any life. So all life comes from the sun, in a way.
Yeah, and that's ecosystems. And without this, but the thing is, what's also deep also, remember how we talked about water?
Yeah.
Best friend and can be your worst enemy? If you lived in the Middle East, the sun could be your best friend and also be your worst enemy. Right? Drought, what happens? When it's too dry.
Yeah.
Right? Okay? Especially in August over there. You don't want to be out. Yeah. You can literally, as I remember when I first got there, they said you could crack an egg on the hood of your car and it'll
Fry.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's so hot. It's so hot. At the same time, you'll need water. Right? This is why we have the prayer of what? Istisqa. Praying for rain. Right? When there's drought. So all of this is what we call ecosystems. The whole process of the cooperation of creation takes place. So with that, subhanAllah, just looking at this verse, وَإِلَى السَّمَاءِ كَيْفَ رُفِعَتْ, and looking at the sky, how it's elevated. Then Allah continues, وَإِلَى الْجِبَالِ كَيْفَ نُصِبَتْ, and the mountains, how they are installed. And the mountains, how they are installed. What's one of the facts that we found out about mountains? They're anchored to the earth, right? If there were no mountains, what has been studied that could possibly take place?
Earthquakes.
Earthquakes, what else? It serves as a what?
Balance.
Right. For the earth. Okay? So we see, again, pondering over these forms of creation, you immediately have to stop and say to yourself, okay, there's no way man could have done this. Right? But then you see how Allah puts the intelligence in man to where they could do something like pyramids, which is still amazing from an engineering standpoint. We have the engineers, right? Amazing. They didn't have our resources. They did not have the resources we have. But they were able to do something till this day is still amazing. How the fact that so if we look at that, and then Allah talks about things that will happen in the future, if He's able to put into the minds of individuals at that time, why is it such a strange thing that He's not able to do what He mentions in the future? Because He is, again, goes back to looking at who is speaking. So mentioning the earth and mentioning the mountains, how they are installed, وَإِلَى الْأَرْضِ كَيْفَ سُطِحَتْ, and the earth, how it is spread out. So the mountains are different places on the earth, and the earth is spread out. It's wide, it's vast. We have grasslands, we have the dry lands, we have the sea, all of these things. And sometimes we have plate tectonics to where, it takes place, one portion of the earth will rise over the other, and then there may be a crack. We have earthquakes. All of this takes place. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we'll stop there, inshallah. We'll stop there and continue with the message to when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the Prophet. فَذَكِّرْ إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُذَكِّرْ. And we're going to talk about how the Prophet ﷺ was a messenger and how mankind does not have ultimate responsibility over another human being, and our responsibility in this life towards others. But we want to conclude, inshallah, by understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the Day of Judgment. He's affirming the Day of Judgment, and that is a pillar of our belief as Muslims. And to understand what the Day of Judgment means to the human being and belief and why it's so important. Understanding that Allah mentions two groups of people, those that are obedient and those that are not, and where they will be and certain characteristics of that. And then calls you to look at creation, how it is created, which will further entice you and encourage you to look back at the previous verses and saying, wow, I did look at creation. Man, the one that created that just mentioned what was before. And when I was reading what was before, I was kind of, okay, cushions in heaven, velvet, couches. Well, the camel was created. Oh, yeah, he did create the camel. Oh. Looking at creation, ponder. And that's what the Quran wants you to do always, is to ponder, to ponder, to ponder. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those, when opening the Quran or looking at Islam, that we always ponder over the basic seeds of life, which will increase us in our remembrance of the creator of those seeds, which will increase us in our attempt and constantly trying to be obedient to him. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyone have any questions or comments before we conclude? Questions? No questions? No,
I
it's
had
over?
one, but I forgot what it was.
Forgot what it was? If you remember, you can ask.
Oh, I know. But I can ask you.
Sure. Sure.
Okay.